Hey guys, thank you for being here. So I'm gonna keep this short and sweet because I'm just gonna stand, I think. Is that cool? Yeah, more engaging. I'm gonna keep it short and sweet because I have been on the other side of a reading and it's like a lot to like take in. So I don't know if you've read the novel, but I hope that, after I'm here, you do, if you have not. So Bright Lines is my first book, and just to give you a little idea of what it's about a Bangladeshi family who lives in Clinton Hill in 2003. So those of you who are from Brooklyn, have you realized and noticed that Brooklyn has really changed in so many ways? So this is kind of a time capsule or a love letter to the Brooklyn of 10 years ago and even 20 years ago. There's parts in the book that are that time period. So it's a little bit of a, the way it used to be type of situation. So it's about this family, and right now what I'm going to read to you is a scene where the girls in the book go on a bike ride to Reese Beach. Okay? A bike ride from 111 Cambridge Place to Reese Beach was a 13-mile adventure. Ella wasn't one for beaches. She was never quite sure of what to wear. Bikinis? Never. One-piece bathing suits were unforgiving and uncomfortable. She could have finished the ride in 40 minutes, but between her cousin Charu's bicycle, a Wicked Witch of the West-style cruiser, there was no speeding on that thing, and the monster camping backpack that Charu had her carrying, Ella found herself at the end of the cycling line. Their backpack was stuffed with a sheet that Charu had patched together from old t-shirts, the ham and chips and soda from the bodega, Ella's boombox and soccer ball, sunscreen, and a change of clothing for when they came home that night. They rode behind Maya, who had made trips to the beach before. Her hijab sailed behind her like a kite, as if she might levitate. The three of them coasted down Ocean Avenue, then turned onto Flatbush Avenue until they crossed the rickety bridge into the state park. On the boardwalk, they hopped off their bikes and walked down to the beach. Maya stopped a few feet away from the wet sand. "Here's good," she said, spreading Charu's patchwork sheet on the sand. Ella hurled the backpack onto one corner of the sheet and used her soccer ball and boombox to hold down the other corners. She took a seat by the boombox. The sound of waves crashing matched Ella's mood, and she took off her glasses to see the world enveloped in streaks of black and white. She stretched her legs and tipped the ball towards the water. Charu yelled, "I'll get it!" She caught the ball from a wave and threw it back to the shore. She jumped into the water and whooped with delight. Maya gestured to the sheet. "Call me crazy, but I don't mind staying just where we are." She broke open a bag of chips and they crunched together, watching the silver waves as Charu's bikini top slipped off. Charu stood in the water, searching for her top. "She thinks it's okay to be topless at the beach," said Ella, smirking. "Yeah, it's the gay beach. No one cares at the gay beach." Ella looked around for more naked people. There was a group of men kicking a soccer ball. 4 of them wore Speedos, and one renegade was completely naked. His dick looked like a shriveled hot dog. All of them were lean, muscular, and brown. Their bare chests glistened with sunscreen and sweat. Ella watched their thick calves as they kicked around the soccer ball. Their backs were as wide as the expanse of a harp. These men roused her. She wasn't attracted to them, not exactly, but she was drawn to the way that they moved their bodies. Ella wished that she could join them. "Yo, you guys, the water isn't even cold," shouted Charu. "Liar," said Ella. "As gorgeous as you are, honey, we're fine right over here," said Maya. "Come on!" Maya stood up. She removed the dressmaker pins that kept her hijab in place. She spread the fabric open on the beach blanket. She took off her clothes, revealing a sports bra and boy shorts. "Shall we go in?" "Yo, I don't know," said Ella. "I told you, I'm not a water person. I can't swim. I didn't bring extra clothes either." "So you're earthbound, but I bet after carrying that backpack you gave yourself a heat stroke, so get over it and let's get in the water." Maya started running towards the waves as Charu ventured deeper to swim. Ella remembered her swimming class failure at the Metropolitan Pool in Williamsburg back in 4th grade. Little Charu had learned with no inhibitions or fears about swimming, but Ella had felt shy in front of the swimming instructor, a pretty high school student named Beatrice. Anytime Beatrice tried to encourage her to transform her doggy paddle into a freestyle, Ella froze from embarrassment. She was still afraid of the water. Maya waited for her, the water up to her shins. "Come closer to me, guys. The waves are incredible," called Charu. "I think we're good over here," Maya replied, cupping her hands around her mouth. Charu shrugged and dove under a wave. "Let's just sit here," said Maya. In the waves, right at the edge of them. Maya lay belly down on the crashing point. Her fingers raked the sand, holding her in place. Ella copied her and felt a large wave crash on her backside. She tried to sit but was taken down by another crashing wave. After a few more attempts, she propped herself up. Maya rolled onto her back. Ella watched Maya's skin tinge golden in the sunlight. Her top was covered in sand, nipples hardened, getting browner as the top soaked through. She had an Arabic tattoo etched on her left rib. What does your tattoo say? The hour has come near, the moon has split in two. They see a miracle. They turn away and say, this is passing magic. They're lines from the Surah Al-Qamar. I thought Muslims weren't allowed to get tattoos. I can't think of anything more godly than tattooing God's own words on myself, said Maya, but you're right, I guess it's too late. Then why do you cover your hair? It was to distract my father's attention at first, but now it's a habit. What about you? Charu told me that you came to New York when you were just a kid. Yeah, I never developed the hydrophilia of my river and ocean people. I left Bangladesh too early, said Ella. I was 5. It was a couple years after my parents died. I'm sorry. I remember a bit here and there. It's hard to miss them, but I want to. Sometimes your folks are gone when they're right here, said Maya. My folks are Moroccan and Egyptian. My mom's family didn't want her marrying a Moroccan. They worried that he'd be too secular. They sure as hell didn't have to worry about that. Have you always lived upstairs from my uncle's store? We used to live out by Coney Island when I was real small, moved to Atlantic around 1st grade. My father got a job as a line cook at Chez Marcel until he decided he'd had enough of the booze and the sluts. His words, not mine. He generally thinks he's better than everyone else, and that's when his holy bookstore was born. My mom has been sick forever. She just got diagnosed with lupus last month. But she's there with you, alive. Do you have to take care of her? Not really, Maya sat up. A large wave crashed on their backs. The water's not so bad now, is it? Ready to go back to the blanket? Ella made them sandwiches while Maya pulled out her book, Kunstformen der Natur, a stick of charcoal, and a sketch pad from her backpack. I hope you don't mind, but I'm still borrowing your book for some drawings I'm working on. I don't mind, Ella said. She had a similar relationship with the book. She'd kept it until it was several months overdue. The library fine had gone up to $90, the maximum amount before they'd made students buy the book. She ended up paying $25 just to keep it. Inside, 101 Art Nouveau lithographs designed by biologist and artist Ernst Haeckel, intricately rendered new species handpicked for feature in his book. Ella was drawn to the strange illustrations of medusae. Each jellyfish took on the likeness of hair or fine jewelry. The trilobites appeared as masked knights fitted for battle. It was a matter of how Haeckel arranged his items. Yes, in each plate there was an assemblage in such a way that you were drawn to the symmetry. There was no reference to the environment where these creatures lived. Their innate form spoke for itself. Whether it was in the pattern, the grooves, the tentacles, needles, leaves, or antlers of the animals, there was an undeniable beauty, no matter how grotesque. Maya stopped drawing and set down her sketch pad, lying back on the sheet. She gestured for Ella to join her. A couple of rogue seagulls zoomed down towards them, and Maya yelped. They missed her head by a foot, busy scavenging other vacationers' leftovers. Ella saw the orange sunset through her closed eyelids. She opened her eyes and watched the sun turn blood orange, then neon green. As dusk crept in, the ocean shifted between a violent inkwell and a bubble bath, back and forth, back and forth. When Maya stepped aside for Maghrib Namaz, using the beach towel as a prayer rug, Ella put her glasses back on. She held her breath during Maya's prostrations, thankful for this respite from her solitude. Charu sauntered back to them, done with the ocean. She pulled aside her bikini strap and pointed to her marked tan. Shit, I got crispy! Maya laughed. You think your mom's gonna notice? She gets paid to notice these things. Guys, I'm starving. Let's get a slice or something, said Ella. That day marked the first and the beginning of their cycling excursions all over the city. The three of them spent the heart of the summer together. On days Maya had off from work, tea time and concerts at Prospect Park, watching the sunset along the East River in Williamsburg, eating dim sum at Jingfeng in Chinatown, wandering through the exhibits at the Brooklyn Museum. They were outsiders, the three of them, uniquely aware of themselves against the world. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed.
I'm ready for that, right? You feel that sun in the air, like biking to the beach. I think that we're all ready. I wanted to read something that's like summer in New York.
Yeah, no, I think that's our next stop now. We're gonna go sunbathe and
Yeah.
maybe not there, but
Yeah,
somewhere.
Somewhere.
Yeah. So I thought we could start out by talking a little bit about Brooklyn, where we are and where most of the book takes place. So you are not from here, correct?
No, I moved here in 2003.
2003. That's a while. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in upstate New York, but not upstate. Who's from upstate? Anybody in here from upstate? Okay, so I'm not from upstate compared to Buffalo, but I grew up near Nyack, which to New York City people is upstate. So Rockland County. And then before that, I lived in Missouri, Alabama, Texas. But I moved to the state of New York when I was 10. So
that's a lot of America. But
yeah,
before
too
10,
much America.
Yeah. So there's no residual accents or
no. Now I have
trauma.
like a kind of writerly non-accent. I don't know. Sometimes.
Did that take a while to perfect?
I don't know. When I moved here from Missouri and I was 9, I thought all the kids from New York were so cool, and I just was a total geek. Like my glasses were this thick, and I said tennis shoes and entertainment, and like I just
tennis shoes.
I had this accent, and I felt very self-conscious of it. So I tried to squash it as quickly as possible. Because when you're 9, you just like don't want to not fit into a new school.
So that's interesting. So going forward now to writing about kids growing up in New York, which you did beautifully, and there's some terrific descriptions of Brooklyn, and it feels real in 2003 and everything. Take us through that process a little bit. How do you get inside the mind of a New York City teenager?
Well, there's two things I think at play. So I was a very rebellious young person, and this meant like sneaking out of my house, running away from home. A lot easier to do when you're living in the suburbs because it's just really boring in the suburbs. It's not like the city, but in the city you have a lot more freedom compared to young people who are like tied to a car or their older friends or whatever. So I had that rebellion that I always knew. Anytime I visited the city, anytime I visited my family in Queens, I was like, I'm definitely moving here because I felt like part of my soul was dying like where I was growing up. So that feeling of wanting to keep getting away from where you grew up is a very big part of, I think, all of our experience as teenagers. And also I worked with young people who were from Bushwick for 10 years before I even called myself a writer. So I was a theater teaching artist, like using theater to kind of talk about social justice issues, taking young people to protests, that kind of thing. So to me, their inflection, the way they spoke, the way they partied, the way they dress, all of that stuff, I was inspired by that. And I was only 20 years old, so there's a lot of kind of learning and growing on my part too. So I think that when you find yourself in a new place that speaks to you, you kind of record it into your person, So for me, this 2003 Brooklyn is like when I really learned to observe the world around me and be grateful for the fact that I was in such an interesting, wonderful type of environment.
Oh, great. So it was when you went to write just about accessing what you'd been kind of recording and observing.
Yeah.
Since you sort of were smitten by New York City.
Yeah, and also I wasn't in New York when I started writing the book. I was like working for this Indian guy in France, and like he fired me, so I had like money saved up, and I had to find a place to live for 3 months because my ticket wasn't until September. So I was just like selling shawls in a hotel and like working on my book because I was just trying to kind of hustle and survive.
Yeah, that
I got fired.
Sounds like you got to roll with the punches sometimes, right?
I like to roll with the punches.
Yeah, and maybe it worked out.
I think so.
In the end, yeah. So, so talk a little bit about the family. It's a Bangladeshi family, and while it takes place in Brooklyn, there's a lot about their Bangladeshi roots. The father was in a Liberian war, right? A certain point halfway through the book, they actually go to Bangladesh, right? So take us through what the sort of culture clashes between Brooklyn, Bangladesh, and this kind of duality that the characters have to deal with.
I think a lot of people who, have this mentality of I live between two worlds, I think that's a very common way of feeling and describing the immigrant experience or the refugee experience. And for me, I'm not different from that. That completely was my experience. So when I first went to Bangladesh, I was 10. And this is right before I moved to New York. So it was like a very intense time. I was like this really moody person. And I just remember how crazy it felt to be in a place where everyone was brown. Everyone looked like me. Like it had just never been my life, ever. In Missouri, all the people around me were white or black. It felt like not even very many South Asians. And then in New York, you have everybody in one big melting pot. But again, every single person of these 160 million people is just brown like me. So I think that experience, I wanted the young girls to have that experience. I had a Bangladeshi man who, as a family friend, kind of pull me aside before reading. He's like, I just want to tell you I didn't really like that part of the book. It felt like you were a tourist.
Oh, that was nice. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Uncle. But he was right. I was acting as a tourist. And I think, that's this role that you kind of play when you're talking about another place that you're from, but it's not the place you're from. You're kind of a translator, a tourist, seeing it through the eyes of someone who's not from there, And my parents chose to leave Bangladesh because they had survived this war and they wanted to make money and help their family, and that had repercussions. They didn't know because they were 25 years old. So they were just like, we're gonna go to America for a while and we'll move back. But now going back is way harder for them because they've become accustomed to the life that they've had in America. So I think I wanted to kind of show the complexity of what it feels like to not only be there for the first time, but also to be returning after decades of living a life in a city where you've changed and you are no longer who you once were. You're no longer the young person that you once were.
Right, and yet that place is so crucial to the identity. Like in Americans or New Yorkers, you're sort of expected to have some split, right? Okay, yes, I'm a New Yorker, but okay, well, what does that mean? Right? Oh no, I'm or Italian, you're Irish, you're Puerto Rican, whatever. Right? You're expected to have these things, and yet the places that you identify may not be, identify you as one of them. Right?
You're an outsider.
You're an outsider to them.
Totally.
Right.
Totally.
Right. So it's almost so that's very interesting. So you're forced to sort of straddle worlds in some senses and straddle the perceptions of others, right? And how they see you and where you fit into those worlds. And
Absolutely.
so it felt like kind of crucial to the development of the girls.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think, there is like a climactic moment that happens in Bangladesh to, say the very least. And the parents have this like return, like, so there's this arc in the novel where the father is unfaithful to his wife. Okay. And I didn't read the father's point of view, but he's a character I really felt connected to writing, more so even than the girls in certain parts, because, I'm a perfumer. My whole life I was raised Muslim, but I think I always rebelled against that, and he feels like very rebellious to me. So when he's unfaithful to his wife, it creates this deep mistrust in the relationship. Obviously, getting cheated on sucks. I mean, if you've ever been cheated on, it sucks. But it's one of those moments where they very much have a rift, and it feels like it's never going to get better. And when they go back to the country of their origins, they kind of go back to being children again, and before the war and during the war, and surviving together. And the warrior marks that you share with another human that you've loved for 30 years really allow you to reconnect. So I wanted not only the girls to discover, but I wanted the parents to fall in love again in a way that would be, much more moving than one of them cheating on the other because they've been repressed their marriage for 30 years.
Yeah. Well, I was sort of rolled into my next question, which is about how you depicted the father, where we're sort of so used to this generational conflict between the traditional father and then the rebellious Americanized daughters. And here you had the father was his own kind of had his own kind of rebellion against his own culture, and that he was Americanized, Brooklynized in some of the ways. He's a pothead. And that sort of opens him up, and so it was a refreshing, kind of change in some of the tropes that we're used to. Any inspiration for his character? Were you doing that deliberately? Say, I want this guy to not be so stodgy and traditional, and this generation is also affected by being in Brooklyn.
I think my favorite, quote unquote uncles or whatever growing up were, the ones that did smoke and drink against the norm of the society that they were around. So the ones that weren't so uptight, I don't drink since 1979. I haven't had a drink. You're like, why? That sounds horrible. I just really was drawn to people who were more artistic in general, and then also a little bit more open to just being normal. To me, those are normal things. And as an artist, obviously, I want to tap into my party side to let life in. So I think for me, I wanted Anwar to embody that. It's not that he's just a pothead for being a pothead's sake. I wanted to really show him using it to be a tool for him to survive these horrible memories he has of violence in the war. If you've learned anything about PTSD, you know that drug use is often something that happens after people have survived something like a war. Unfortunately in America right now, it's fentanyl and opioid addiction, which has people really, 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 kind of reckoning with their lives right now. But I think for him, I wanted him to have this weed that allows him to connect to other men in his neighborhood, his best friend, and create this hub pretty much where he can just be completely himself and also see his best friend's head pop up, right? So there's this hallucination that he has when he's smoking a lot of weed where his best friend who died he's allowed to connect as a man emotionally to that friend who's dead. And I think those things are very hard for him to do without the aid of this marijuana. So I wanted him to have this moment of softness because he's using something to open himself up.
And useful as a writer, from a writer's point of view, that you have this this device to get the hallucinations and the interactions, because that's such an internal thing to try to write about, and it worked very nicely, especially because, anyone who smoked weed knows that your dead friends' heads appear, and it
pop up out of nowhere.
And you just, you can totally relate as an audience. All right, let's talk a little bit about the sort of creation of the book, right? You said it goes back to at least in your brain 2003. How long did it take to write it, to go through the whole, from the artistic process to the professional process of getting it published? How long did that whole process take?
So I think I was telling you this in the back room. I was in theater first and was in playwright first. So that was my passion, performing and being on stage and all this stuff. But there's only a limited amount of words you can get into a play. And I felt like I had so many more words to get out on the page. And part of me always wanted to write a book since I can remember, maybe first, second grade. I always thought I would write a book. So that was always in the back of my mind. And then I got this fellowship to basically work with college students in theater projects in India. And I would be taken to a village. We would have to give up our cell phones, junk food, any kind of technology, and live in peace with the land. And it's a lot of things. You'd have to dig your own holes to go to the bathroom kind of thing. It was very living off the land type of shit. So it was very intense. I was in nature. But then mixed with that, I was living in New Delhi, which is a really mad kind of intense city where there's a lot of people and a lot of energy that's very, very intense for a foreign woman. So those two kind of emotional, this pendulum swinging between the two experiences that I was having created this sort of desire to figure out what's next. Because I was like, this is not going to last forever. I'm not going to be here forever. I need to know what's happening next. And I was also probably one of the most unhealthy phases of my, in my 20s at that point too. So I was staying out all night, I was drinking, I was really, really partying hard, and I was just kind of like, I'm done with this. This is like killing me right now. I had this like come to Jesus moment with the whole thing.
Literally Jesus, or
just whoever, somewhat summoning like the God. You know, I just had this moment of like, I am really feeling a lot, and I started writing. And you know, all that emotional stuff aside, I kind of got into this flow of a book, and then I just decided to apply to Brooklyn College MFA and Hunter College MFA. I chose Brooklyn College because I wanted to live in Brooklyn. And it's a wrap, you know? After that, I was kind of like, I'm going to do an MFA. Now, I don't know if you are all, is everyone undergrad here pretty much? I mean, if you're a student, you're undergrad. So, I mean, that's one of those things where you're kind of like, what am I doing next? You know, so I had just come out of that, worked a couple of years in Bushwick, and then I was living in the city and in the weird, you know, rural camps that we were setting up. So I honestly wanted to go back to the city, live in Brooklyn, and it felt like a good idea to get my MFA. Now, the reason I think if you're a writer who's thinking about doing an MFA or not, or you guys are doing an MFA soon,
we're offering one.
You're offering one. I mean, doing it in the city is pretty awesome because you're still immersed in a place that's familiar to you, which I needed to feel like I could write. But also all these amazing writers, like the best writers, live in New York or come to New York or read in New York, and you get to be a part of this community that I never would have known had I not done an MFA. It's just absolutely true. You know, it might get in your head, and of course a lot of pages from my MFA I threw away because I was like, this is like clearly my workshop talking, not me.
Right.
But that aside, I have friendships with writers who taught me that will never go away, that I completely am so indebted to. So after that happened, you know, I kind of decided I wanted to do this book and finish it. And when I finished it, I found an agent, and then we sold it. So, I mean.
Was the MFA, do you think you would have finished it without, if you hadn't done the program?
I don't think I would have that sort of hunger. You know, I'm very much a person that's like, oh, I'm into this now, I'm going to do this, and then I move on, and then so I don't think a book is conducive to that sort of personality, you know, because a book is a sustained effort, and you're just staring at the mountain, and you're like, I got to climb this thing, and it hurts sometimes. It literally hurts. Like you will be moved to tears with that process, and we all go through it, but it's also humiliating to talk about it with other writers, you know, because you feel almost like embarrassed to be so vulnerable with somebody. So I went through all those feelings. But for me, I know that the MFA kept me accountable to the process. It made me want to do work that was better because other people were doing really good work. And I was learning from writers who were published writers, who were showing me that their life committed to the act of writing fiction or poetry had meaning, and I wanted to kind of find my own voice within that. So I think I definitely was held accountable to being a writer because of that program.
Yeah, and then you sort of see how the variety of different ways that a writer can find their niche and way to live,
especially
in
now.
the world.
I mean, now you can work in media and write essays and people read it. You know, I think writing fiction is still so important, but it feels like there was this moment in the 2000s where we're like, books aren't going to exist anymore. Like, everyone's going to read off their phone and it's going to be hell, you know? And like, I don't know, there was like this really like witch trial hysteria, I feel like, about books.
Yeah, ebooks I think were very threatening.
Yeah,
to
people were threatened, right?
Yeah.
And then now I'm like, books are here to stay.
Yeah.
And writers are here to write, and we're fine. Like,
and
it's
really,
gonna be okay.
I think people read more now.
They do.
Even though they may not read books more, but the actual act of reading text, and people compose language as, you know, you have whole conversations where instead of just you and I off the top of our head, right? I mean, every time you interact with text, you're kind of writing dialogue. You know, you're taking that moment to say, or what exactly do I want to say, and how am I going to say
and
it?
Revising.
And revising. And if you ever did long, anyone ever send long personal emails around to friends for edits?
No, like to someone that
You never
you
had to do
are
that?
scared to send it to?
Like, oh, did I sound too upset here? Did I sound That's basically the workshop
my
process.
God. Yeah.
You know, some people
Yeah.
I know are like, sometimes you need a reader to make sure you sound right and you're dealing with language properly.
I do that with my friends. They're like, girl, was I being crazy?
Right.
And
And
you're
how
just
many-
like, read
right.
this for me, please. Yeah.
How many of us have like scrolled through text messages to tell somebody the meaning of the conversation with this friend or whatever, right? Oh, and when you said this, I could have taken this way. I mean, that's basically a writer's workshop, right? I mean, it's basically you're looking through dialogue, looking at language, find relationships.
Except people will say things like, I felt nothing for this character and I feel like he shouldn't exist or whatever. It's just like, oh my God, my
Your friends
heart.
might say that too.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, that's true.
You might, block this person. I mean, it's similar feedback, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So what kinds of trying to be a writer in the world, and obviously you get a book out there, but there's still so much that has to happen for the life to work, right? And you had some really interesting side hustles, main hustles. I don't know what designation goes in what, but could you talk a little bit about the sort of the juggling act and the sort of the creative energy that comes with the lifestyle?
So I am one of those writers. I don't know if this is rare or normal, but I don't live off my writing. I think that sounds normal.
That's
to me.
normal.
Yeah, that's normal. Because writing is a hard thing to live off of. Even though that seems obvious to me, I don't know, it's not obvious because there's so much writing that we're actually consuming. So there's this trajectory of you do an MFA and then you decide you want to be a teacher, which I taught for a long time in a certain context, but I cannot be like a teacher who has to grade papers in this traditional sense.
Yeah, who could do that?
You could, I mean, you're doing that. I don't know. You could do that. You're doing that. Yeah. It's hard. It's a lot of work. I give you so many props for doing that.
Thank you.
Because it's like, you got to be on point, you know? Like, you're like, I'm falling apart, but I have to not fall apart so that, like, you don't fall apart because you're my student. You know, like, that relationship is a
True.
intense relationship, you know? So I'm very in touch with who I am. So I'm like, I don't know if I can handle that. So that aside, I love teaching in small spurts, but I think it's hard when you're trying to become a tenured professor. There's like a whole other situation. So what to do, you know, get a job at a media company. Well, there's a part of me that really resisted writing as a career and nonfiction because I think that takes away from my brain that needs to be like, fiction is sacred and it's a special place for me to play or whatever. Precious thoughts like that. And then I also love perfuming and making products and candles and actual perfumes and all that. I make so many different, I've always been into making things. So I decided to launch that into a business, which has grown. Like now my brand is in 60 stores and
Congratulations.
Thank you. So I'm very much invested in its growth and creating new scents and letting my brain kind of find this new form of art or creating to inspire me, you know. And I think as a writer, you're so cerebral in your head. Like, it's very good to be using your hands and your body. Like, I stand on my feet for like 12 hours a day, like pouring candles, and like, I just feel like this whole other. I was telling Ian, I was like, this is so anti-intellectual. Like, it's just in your body, making stuff to sell. It's like kind of like a different brain. And in my world right now, it's making sense because it keeps my writing fresh and hopefully, you know, allows me to separate what I do, you know, for work, for my main source of income from the thing that I love.
Well, so it's great these things are sort of flowering and they're working on multiple fronts. I think the hard part, and you know, for a lot of our students who are, you know, getting ready to face the world, they have may have talents, may have passions, and they're at these sort of kind of crucial moments where they're deciding, how do I pursue this? What does this look like in the real world? Is there a career here, or do I need to, you know, make some compromises for security? What was it like going through that phase of things where, yeah, it's all great now to, you know, retrospect, scents and candles and books. 10 years ago, there was no guaranteed scents, candles, and books. How do you get through those?
10 years?
Yeah, like without you know, you don't have the security, don't have the certainty. You're out there a little bit on a wing and a prayer. How do you get through those? How did you get through those times?
So I definitely knew graduating from college, like I didn't want to be in a corporate job. Like that was my like number one rule in my head. I was like, I'm not going into like a job where I have to sit in an office, traditional office. I just didn't want to do that. I wanted to work with the community, nonprofit space. So the first job I ever got out of college was at an organization called Make the Road New York. And they've grown, like they've also grown, but they were just like one office in Bushwick on Grove and Knickerbocker. And they were like, you're running the theater group for the kids at Bushwick School for Social Justice. It was like kind of like this gig that was like made for me. And I think my first salary was like $35,000 a year, something like very like, you know, nonprofit.
Right.
Nonprofit. But I learned so much about how to speak and be in my voice and lead and learn from young people and be creative and use our collective experiences to create theater performances that told their life stories, that actually had a cathartic effect for them. I'm still in touch with these students. They're all like 25-year-olds now, and we're friends. They're just my friends. They come over. We're just regular friends now.
Mm-hmm.
But it kind of was an amazing first job to show me that that's the kind of work I wanted to do. And I did do that work as program managing and program directing young people's programming for a decade. You know, like that was my job. And I think for me, that gave me a lot of life. But then in my 29th year or so, I was starting to feel like I'm not writing enough. I'm not being a writer. Like I'm doing a play here, I'm doing a play there, but I'm not living this thing that I wanted to do, you know? So I've been working on a book for a few years, but I was like, it's actually time for me to try to put myself out there and find an agent and sell it. And I think when I was working in nonprofit, it showed me that there's a lot of people who are doing hard work who are not thanked for their hard work, you know? And I think it's very easy to get caught up in like jobs that kind of give you some sort of like social media following or presence or something that's like a little bit more like lustrous and feels a little bit more fancy and sexy. But I think taking the other path was really helpful for me to actually create deep connections with other human beings. So if you're someone who's like, I want to, you know, I'm doing economics and I'm doing, I don't know, women's studies. I'm just making up a major. You know, you're like, what do I do? I think for when you're young and you have stamina, it's cool to follow that like women's studies feminist trajectory first, and then figure out how to take in these jobs that might give you a little bit more income and money. I think it's okay to like be a little broke, but like get really rich in life experience, and then let that experience make you not broke anymore. I think that that is a great trajectory. I think too many of us are caught up in like, how do I make money? How do I get, you know, all this stuff, and it's just very empty, and it's not going to make you connect to people in a deeper way. And I actually, you know, I have a cousin who's 19, so I'm around a young person who's in college. And I see her, and she's just like, you know, part of her is like a total digital native, like always on her phone, always using Snapchat, or, you know, just like addicted to it, honestly, like in a way that I don't think I can be. But I'm still pretty addicted to it. And then the other side of her is like volunteering with young people and like choosing to major in things that she's passionate about and like really, really invested in that. And I like to think that my sister and I were like, you can do that and also be like cool and hip and connected. Like you can do both things, you know, but I don't think we shouldn't be in pursuit of what makes us feel like the most fabulous to others, because that's just, it feels empty to me, you know? And I think we struggle with that too, being in a different generation as well. Like
absolutely, when
feeling relevant or whatever.
And where we fall, our relationship with the social medias and the new things. Everybody in our generation is different, whereas they don't have that luxury. That's pretty much the
norm.
Yeah. That's where you gather. That's where you meet. That's where everything happens.
Yeah.
Right?
What do you think in the life that you've been in Brooklyn or New York? What is the one thing that you think that it gave you the most?
That's a great question. I have made some of the most incredible friendships here from people who all kind of felt like weirdos and freaks in their family. Like I felt like I still do. I just saw my parents yesterday, and I'm like, I'm such a freak compared to these people. Like we all found each other somehow and are still so tight. And things change. You know, I'm 35 now, and when I met them, I was 20. So it's like one of those things where I'm like, yo, I've known you for a long time, and there's still something in you that's like, it's just so, we were kids and we just came up together and we were attracted to this borough for the reasons everybody is attracted to this borough, and it helped us to be the artists that we are today. You know, friends who are dancers and singers and art, like everyone's got this like sense of like hustling because all the dancers are here, all the writers are here, all, you know, all the people of your thing are here, and it pushes you. So I think for me, feeling that energy and that verve and that love, like it still fulfills me. You know, like on Sunday there was a gorgeous day outside, like the gorgeous day that we just had. And I was gonna stay home and write and be like moody, but that was making me so pissed. And I was like, you know what? No, I'm gonna go to Fort Greene Park and like go eat some food with my friends and walk around. And then we went to BAM and we just all did this neighborhood stuff. And I was like, this is what it is. Like you have these beautiful moments with friends because all of you are kind of searching for the same moment in the city. And I know that that's one part of Brooklyn. That's not every part of Brooklyn. I know there are some parts of Brooklyn that you don't want to be walking there late at night. That's not where I haven't found that sense of fear in the borough. Like I've had a lot of love and friendships here. So what's next? Oh my gosh. So I will just say this. I'm working on a new book called Remnants of a Star, and it's totally different. But there is this like hustler thing that's still in there, but it's about this basically imagined island in the East River that this girl grows up on. So it's like this like kind of story of a woman from the 1960s to the 2060s. She's one of the oldest women on Earth. So it's kind of taking me into this new terrain of speculative fiction. So I'm working on that. But it's a struggle. It's like just as hard as starting my first book. So I don't know that I'm in a place of like feeling perfect about it because I don't think it gets easier. I think this shit gets harder and harder. Yeah. Like I'm just like, am I doing this right? So I don't know. I'm still in that.
You said you grew up Muslim, right? How did your family feel of like you just taking on like the artsy side of things and not like a traditional job, or moving here and wanting like different things for yourself and
You know, honestly, now they love it because they're like, you're so fabulous. This is great. But they hated it. Oh my gosh. Like they were so ashamed, you know, and I like did like the theater that I did wasn't just like, you know, a play about, you know, Shakespeare or anything. It was like, you know, women doing stuff to each other on stage, like being wild, and my dad filming it and like the camera and it's like shaking. Like all the videos are like the camera's shaking because he can't bear to watch. So I wasn't like, they were not happy with it and they were very threatened by it. And I think the part of why I persisted is it was one of those things of I can't actually live if I can't be myself. Like my life is not actually worth living if I can't be myself. Do you get that? And I would like sit them down and be like, do you understand that? Like when I'm around you guys, I feel like I want to die because I can't be myself. And I'm in therapy for years because I think everyone should go. But we talk about how hiding who I was from my family for so many years of my life has created this like angry little monster inside of me that doesn't ever really go away, but you learn how to deal with it. But like lying to your family about who you are, like I think that's being Muslim for sure. I mean, it's an intense thing to not be. I mean, clearly I'm not Muslim in a traditional way, but I think lying about who you are is super toxic, you know? And we're living in a time where people are so honest on social media with who they are, but when they're with their family, they're like not. Like, I can't dress like this with my family, even now. Even though I am the age that I am, I can't dress like this in front of them without them being like, oh, well, why do you have to make us feel so bad with, your arms and legs. I don't even know. I don't actually understand. I'm just like, sorry. So I just dress really conservatively, and like I eat pork, they don't eat pork. These little things that you think are so dumb, but it's like that really hurts them. So I think that me writing this book in a fictive way allowed them to see a part of me that they had never seen. And my mom actually loved the book, and she was like, you should write about whatever you want, because that's what writers do. But if I tell her I want to work on a memoir, she's like, please wait until we're dead and then write that. So it's very different. When it's fiction, it's not real. And when it's nonfiction, it's like way too real, and like definitely wait until we're dead. So I think it's still a negotiation. They're proud of me, but they're also like hurt by some of the decisions that I make. Even when I make them now, they still get bummed out about stuff. So I have to always negotiate that. But I'm really glad that instead of saying, my parents want me to like get married and like do this thing, that I was like, fuck you guys, I'm not doing that, I'm doing me. Like, you have to do that. Because too many people are like, my parents made me do this X, Y, and Z thing. And it's just like, it's not worth it. It's just not worth it. Yeah, I have friends that got married at 23 and now they're 35 and they're just like divorced, or getting, out of relationships and getting into new ones that are actually fulfilling. I think it's really like, it'll catch up to you. So
Thank you.
thank you guys. It was really fun. Thanks.